Welcome to Authentic Living with Roxanne, a place where we have conscious conversations about things that really matter in our lives. And now, here's your host, Roxanne Derhaj.
Hi everyone, it's Roxanne Derhaj of Authentic Living with Roxanne. Thanks for tuning in again. Today I have a special guest, Natalie Nixon. Hi Natalie, how are you today?
Hi, Roxanne. Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Natalie is the president of the Figure Eight Thinking and the author of the Creativity Leap. So she helps leaders design optimal experiences to leverage creativity and sustain innovation and to prioritize their goals, resulting in happier employees, which I would think that that's in this time, that's something that I think before 2020, most people were wanting to be happier at work, but I would think that that's been more of an issue lately. And you work in the strategy, foresight, and change management spaces.
Yes.
So I would think that you've been pretty busy this year.
Yeah, actually I have been. It's been an incredible year for all of us, and as I'm become really fond of saying, days of uncertainty are designed for creativity. So
Mhm.
I've been keeping busy indeed.
So let's talk about that. When you say days of uncertainty breeds creativity, I would say that the average person, I don't know if you would agree with that, would say absolutely not. We'd be diametrically opposed to when we're uncertain, we're often in fear. And when we're in fear, we're kind of, our amygdala is kind of activated, and oftentimes people get into a frozen state. But you're saying actually the opposite is true of creativity. Tell me a little bit more about that, with it being your expertise.
Well, I say that days of uncertainty are designed for creativity because creativity loves mess. And this is a bit of a hot mess of a time. And creativity is not doing whatever you feel like. Creativity actually loves constraints. It loves constraints on time, constraints on resources, constraints on people talent. And so when we have this pressure cooker environment and moment as we've been living through in the COVID quarantine, this is actually the time when it actually is pretty fruitless to pull out a linear Gantt chart. You're not going to project manage your way out of these sorts of circumstances. The best way to navigate uncertainty is which is a complex system. The best way to navigate complexity is with complexity. And creativity is a complex system. It is, I think about creativity as toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And when we are living through what in systems design and systems thing we call wicked challenges, these are questions like how do we ensure that every child gets a first class education? How do we ensure that there's equitable access to healing and health systems? How do we ensure all those sorts of big questions? That requires creativity to problem solve our way through that. So that's my perspective on how we get through these times.
Well, it's interesting. So tell me more about when we think from a micro level, let's say, when you see employees, and most employees are wanting a bit of certainty. And you would say that in 2020, the certainty has been the polar opposite of what people generally are looking for. We recognize that there's, when I was in consulting with health and wellness, at any given point, my portfolio of companies were in flux. About 75% of them were in flux. In 2020, that percentage would even be more, because at any given point there was change going on. There was change over change over change. So how is it that when you're out there, how are you seeing senior leaders dealing with the element of their mental health and well-being in order to make the most of that tension that you're talking about?
I wouldn't call it a tension. It's actually an opportunity to lean into the what feels like a ball of confusion. It's actually a bit counterintuitive. What I'm finding with my clients is that right now, there's a kind of awakening moment that this is requires very much inside out work. And what I mean by that is we have the opportunity now to bring more of our fully human selves to work. And actually, we're doing that through these digital meeting spaces. So if you're on a Zoom or Teams or whatever the platform is meeting, you get a glimpse into people's home life. You get a glimpse into their spouse walking by. You get a glimpse into dimensions of themselves that we typically have been unaware of or who haven't been curious about. And so right now, we get to redesign our relationship with time. We get to redesign our relationship with ourselves and with our colleagues. And in fact, I find that it actually improves productivity because otherwise, most of us have been showing up to work in drag. It's Natalie's greatest hits, the best of, and anyone who's had to hide a dimension of themselves at work and not show up fully, truly with their human selves, it does diminish productivity. So if people were to know that I am an emerging ballroom dancer, I love ballroom dance, and they were to ask me from basic hallway moments and casual conversation to what I can borrow from that world to give to a challenge at hand at work, it actually helps me to show up differently. And we are now in what's called the fourth industrial revolution, which is the revolution characterized by ubiquitous technology. And the train's left the station. That moment is here. So I have an Alexa app in my office. I'm talking softly so it doesn't start to ding, ding, ding. And that's powered by, that's an example of actually augmented reality and AI. If we don't know the meaning of a word, we Google it or do a Yahoo search on it. That's driven by artificial intelligence. A lot of healthcare surgeries are done with robotics now. So because there will be casualties in this fourth industrial revolution where any kind of task-oriented work will be most likely be replaced, the silver lining is that actually makes more space and room for our human selves to show up. So going back to the top of my answer, when I said that there's actually now more opportunity for us to do inside out work, what I'm saying is opportunity for us to merge the individual and the group, the private and the public, work and home. And I don't think we're not going to go back to the old normal. The next normal is going to be a hybrid working style where the boundaries are a lot more blurred.
And I like that perspective because oftentimes when I talk to people, they'll talk about that blurring of the lines as being a negative. And you're the first person that I've spoken to that has had that perspective, which is, it's so true because recently I interviewed a recognition expert. And what he did is he oftentimes would say to people, tell me what you were doing just before we got on the line. And tell me what you're going to be doing right after you got off the line. And I thought, isn't that quite interesting? It's a fascinating thing because obviously we know that leaders have, the more that they're connected to themselves, they're more able to connect to others around them. And so I said, okay, let's play the game. He said he just had to get rid of the cat that was climbing up his leg. His daughter just ran in with her homework that she's kind of semi-finished, but was trying not to finish. And then he was trying to finish off lunch before he could kind of come on, do the podcast, and then go off again. And then he had to pick up exactly what he left off. So he was talking, which is what you're sharing, Natalie, about the reality, like that blurred lines actually lets us get to know each other on a completely different level, other than the typical, hey, how you doing, Roxanne? Pretty good. How are your children? What's new? How's your mom and dad? Blah, 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 blah. And we move on. And that's about the extent of it. But what you're saying makes so much more sense because now work and home are one and the same.
When people feel seen and when people feel heard, they show up differently. And that's whether you're talking about in a school environment and you're talking about the size of a classroom, or you're talking about corporations that move kind of more towards a pod model so that people feel seen and heard. We as humans, we crave connection. It's part of how we are designed. And so any ways that we can do that, the better off the organization will be, the better off the people will be who are showing up every day. And I was really reflecting back in April how, a couple of centuries ago, when most of the world was based in an agricultural economy, you'd wake up in the morning, you'd do your ablutions, you'd have something to eat, you'd cross over your threshold, and you were at work. And I've been working from home for about 3 years now, but now more and more people are waking up in the morning, doing their ablutions, having something to eat. And mine's a 30-second commute. I step over my threshold and I'm at work. So that's another example of just how this moment is blurring the lines between work and home and personal and professional and that sort of thing.
So I'm just curious, right? Like for companies that were already into that element of creativity and recognizes and accepting all the moving parts, they would be way ahead when they had to shift completely to, say, a virtual workforce. What about for other environments? What have you seen out there? People that had to adjust quickly, that hadn't maybe had some of the parts together. What were some of the struggles that you've heard of, or even that you've worked with people that hadn't, I'm going to say, you embrace the elements of what it takes to be creative?
So let me unpack how I define creativity for a moment to answer that question. So I've already shared that I think about creativity as toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems and produce value at scale. And I talk about that in my new book, The Creativity Leap. And wonder is about awe and audacity and asking big blue sky what if questions. And it's also about pausing. Rigor is about discipline and time on task and deep skill development, and both are really essential. So what I find in a lot of organizations, they're not quite they're further away from the wonder piece, and often what they think is rigor, they've conflated it with rigidity. And rigidity and rigor are not the same thing. So rigidity might be, tightly bound constraints that are inflexible. As I said, creativity needs rules and loves rules. It loves constraints, but they are fluid structures. Think about an improvisational jazz band. There are rules to jazz improvisation. Jazz is not about doing whatever you feel like. And so the opportunity is to design in more space and more time for both the wonder and for the rigor. And I've really been honing in on what I call the value of the pause. And the COVID quarantine has incentivized a lot of us to pause. Some of us are less comfortable with that pause than others. Yes. But as an organization, really accept that you take your medicine now or you take it later. If you don't pause now to reevaluate in order to reboot, you will have to pause in a very reactionary way. And as one of my professional crushes, Esther Perel says, one of the many wise things she was saying in one of her podcasts in rapid form, she referenced how being reactionary is the opposite of being creative. When we are creative, we're not being reactionary. We are actually responding and acting in the moment. The other dimension of creativity that's part of my creativity framework is what I call the 3 I's. And the 3 I's are inquiry, improvisation, and intuition. So those are 3 specific dimensions of exercising creativity that we as individuals and our companies can do. So asking more questions, leading with questions, being more transparent about, as leaders, about the questions we have about where we are, where the company is, inviting and encouraging questions, and understanding that asking questions is a way of thinking, as Warren Berger likes to say. Improvisation, I did my entire doctoral research was about the Ritz-Carlton and the ways that they design experiences for guests. And it turns out the Ritz-Carlton organization is an improvisational organization. They could not be a micromanaged permission slip culture if they wanted to consistently delight and surprise guests. Right. And then finally, intuition is not something we talk about in business school, law school, or medical school, yet every successful leader acknowledges intuition, or what I call pattern recognition, in decision making. So those are three ways that companies can really start to engage in the creative process.
And I'm also launching my second book as well, Natalie, and it's on authentic heart leadership, and it's coming from the space that when the leader is able to take that pause, to use your term, and really center themselves and understand, their leadership story and their decision making process or matrix, and what are the influences that made them become the kind of core leaders that they are. Then they become that much more attuned to themselves, and they have to, at the end of the day, make decisions from a very, very deep space within themselves. And the leaders that are cutting edge are actually taking that space ongoing time throughout their day, their week, even before the pandemic, to be able to get to that space. But I think now everybody kind of got slammed into March, and then it's like, there was this reverberation for people to say, wow, I've got all this time and I've got all this family around me, and I need some kind of space. So it got created out of that space. But really, leaders that are connected are the ones that were always making that as a part of their diet throughout their day, throughout their quarters, or just generally.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about uncertainty, right? And there's obviously, from your world, that's a really positive space. But unfortunately, I was just reading some stats just on LinkedIn from the Canadian workforce, and what they're saying is a lot more people are stressed. They're talking about millennials being, the ones that are kind of remote or hybrid. They're more uncertain of their futures, and a lot of them are making decisions based on fear, which is kind of where I work with mental health and well-being. What kind of strategies would you suggest for leaders that are having a lot more of their population coming from a place of fear?
Well, first I should clarify, I don't come from the perspective that uncertainty is a great thing. I come from the perspective that if we build our creative competency, if we build that muscle and exercise it, we will get increasingly better at sitting with the discomfort of ambiguity. I don't think the discomfort of ambiguity and uncertainty ever goes away. Mm-hmm. It's much more a question of how we respond to it. So I recall, and I include this in the book, The Creativity Leap, that I listened to a podcast. I love a podcast called Hello Monday, with Jessie Hempel, and she was interviewing the actress Laura Linney. And Laura Linney was talking about how artists, specifically actors, are really good at wrestling with the discomfort of ambiguity. They are much more trained to embrace process rather than solution. And all of this work starts with a shift in mindset. So, I have a background in cultural anthropology and fashion, and I keep saying this, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. I'm create a t-shirt that says it's culture silly, because at the end of the day, all of these changes lead to needing to make a shift in culture. And culture change starts with shifts in mindset, which lead to shifts in behaviors, which culminate in an organizational change. And that doesn't happen overnight. So I would say to leaders who are identifying, current employees and thinking about ways they want to prepare going forward, to spend a lot of time with mindset shifting away from being solutions obsessed to being process obsessed. And I call it becoming ambiguous confident and future friendly. And that also means you have an opportunity to start to hire different sorts of people. So much creativity is sparked from cognitive diversity, from people who don't think the way I do, who would approach the same challenge in a completely different way. So those are a few of the ways that organizations can tackle this time.
Well, it sounds like you've been busy, and I know you're a global speaker, and people have the opportunity to. You're being very gracious with allowing them to download a copy, a chapter of the book. So why don't you tell them where they can do that, and also for opportunities to either consult or have you come in and speak, where they can also reach you, Natalie.
If they go to figure8thinking.com, that's the word figure, the number 8, thinking.com. Right on the homepage at the top banner, they can click right there and they can download a free sample chapter of the Creativity Leap, and they will also start to receive the Ever Wonder newsletter, where I add all sorts of updates on group coaching opportunities that I'm starting to launch, as well as my consulting practice and my advisory practice. So thank you so much for asking me to share that.
Well, thanks so much for spending the time. So what have I learned? I think coming at uncertainty from the mental health space, I like that concept of wonder and rigor. Like, I love that space, because really what it kind of puts you into the space to look at it from a different angle, versus the deficits. And none of us like uncertainty, to your point, right? Most of us, we're human beings. We like buckets to put things in. But when you kind of start to accept the space, and really what we're seeing already with 2021, that there's going to be a lot more uncertainty, to get comfortable with process versus outcome or solution, that seems to be a better space. So that would be the challenge to people listening, to try to start to think or develop from that space of getting comfortable with the unknown. And I know we've tried to do that for the first 6 months, and the last couple of months, I think we're probably finding our footing a little bit better. So again, Natalie, thanks so much for your time. For everyone, if you're ever wanting to connect about authentic leadership, you can reach me at roxannederhodge.com. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Authentic Living with Roxanne, creating the space for positive, healthy change. Roxanne is a keynote speaker, psychotherapist, and coach. To work with Roxanne, visit roxannederhodge.com/blueprint. We'll see you next time on Authentic Living with Roxanne.